Continuing our story on the arrival of Buddhism into China, we saw that China was and is pretty different civilization, economy, nation from India. Its ideas are different. For example, the state is superior in China than the spiritual or religious authorities, for example, and so on. And how Buddhism enters China through Silk Route in different levels, scholarly level, popular level, how it influences economic and political institutions, temple architecture, and across the classes, and even some norms and rituals we saw last time. Now let's look at the history of, again, the arrival of Buddhism. Let's look at the slide 4 now. So if you look at this slide, we have four Buddhist periods. First period is sort of preparing the ground for the arrival of Buddhism in China. So from 65 to 317 CE, Han dynasty, a very prominent, important dynasty, is breaking apart for various reasons. All Chinese dynasties, almost all, show this pattern of 3 centuries. Every dynasty lasts, sort of progresses, builds up in first half, first 100 years, and then it stabilizes the second century, and third century it starts to fall apart. We see this cycle in various dynasties of China. So Han dynasty was no exception. It builds itself, it stabilizes itself, and then it tends to fall apart. So that's what is happening in that particular time period, and that's the time when Buddhism is slowly making into inroads through Silk Route and so on. Buddha has already departed for about 500 years before this period, and but his teachings are preserved in India in different texts, Pali, written in Pali language or Sanskrit language, and these texts are now entering China through Silk Route, and these texts are now being translated in Taoist terminology. Taoism is one of the ancient traditions of China. So that tradition is now trying to embrace Buddhism, and it tries to translate Buddhist texts in that terminology, and we'll see how in the next few slides. But first, let's complete this historic progression of Buddhism in China. So that's the first period, preparation. Second period is of domestication of Buddhism into China. From 317 CE to 589 CE, Buddhism provides these alternative ideas that are different from the native ideas of Buddhism, of China, and how these alternative ideas can be compared and nativized in China is what we are going to see. Northern part of China, Buddhism is adopted by the foreign conquerors who are looking for alien ideas because they already came from foreign countries. They are more hospitable to foreign ideas, and Buddhism being a foreign idea to China, they adopt Buddhism pretty easily. Southern part of China sees Buddhism being adopted in different levels. Lower classes, upper classes, scholars, and common people, they all are learning and adopting Buddhism in their own ways in southern parts of China. Northern parts, the foreign conquerors. Southern parts, all levels. So Buddhism can be seen, is called by some scholars as a civilizing philosophy, kind of, not to try to value judge, but I'm just quoting from other scholars that how Buddhism, in a way, shared these ideas of ethics and compassion at a very massive level in China. So, in some respect, we can probably call that as that word civilizing philosophy. Although it sounds like a colonial tendencies which Buddhism rarely had, if ever. So it's not a colonial way. It's not a colonial civilizing philosophy in that respect, but just that idea how the ideas of ethics and compassion, vegetarianism, and so on, how it spreads especially in the southern parts of China. All that is happening in this domestication period. Eventually, Buddhism emerges as a unifier for the entire China. So Buddhism is adopted by masses in the south of China, north of China, and it's being nativized across China, and it becomes sort of this unifier tradition across China. Amazing. It's something that probably rarely happened in India for a very short period, and then eventually it disappears from India. But in China, it becomes a very native and very unifying tradition across China. Very interesting. Third period is the period of acceptance and independent growth of Buddhism in China from 589 to 900 CE. Now China sees its own version of indigenous, independent version of Buddhism in China. Kings are supporting Buddhism in this period. Monks are subordinated to kings, as I said in the previous slides. Kings are superior in the hierarchy. Emperors, the state is superior, and even today that's true. So monks are subordinated. That's different from India, as we saw in the last slide. The native Buddhist traditions of China, two of the most prominent ones are the Chan Buddhism and Tintai Buddhism. These are native Chinese intellectualist schools with Indian Vinaya monastic traditions. So the ideas of rules, the rules of the monastic communities are called as Vinaya in Indian language. Vinaya means the humility and how monks should behave, monks and nuns should behave in monasteries are all codified in that part of the text of Buddhism. So Chan and Tintai are the two native Chinese intellectualist traditions. So intellectual focus and ethical focus for monks and nuns. These are the two prominent traditions, branches of Buddhism that develop and spread in China. Incidentally, Chan word comes from the word dhyana, which means meditation in Indian language. Dhyana in Sanskrit means meditation, and so that dhyana, Dhyan, becomes Chan in Chinese language. And then also in this time period, 589 to 900 CE, we see Confucianism, which is another second indigenous long old tradition of China in addition to Taoism. Confucianism starts getting its own revival. And politically, that leads to decline of Buddhism because Confucianism makes a comeback. Taoism is already there, and so Buddhism sort of takes a back seat, and Confucianism gets revived in this period also, especially between around 800 to 900 CE. And finally, the last period of Buddhist development in China is the time period of appropriation, where Buddhism completely assimilated into Confucianism and Taoism. Something that happened in India also actually in the same period, 900 CE onwards. Buddhism merges with Hinduism and loses its separate identity in India and also in China, where they all merge together: Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. All right, let's keep going. Now, slide 5, fifth slide. What is Neo-Taoism? Very interesting. Neo-Taoism gets several of its ideas from Buddhism. Naturalness, nature without human intervention. Nature should be enjoyed, should be experienced without human intervention in its pure, pristine form. Self-perpetuating balanced order of nature is how Taoism defines nature. Spontaneous liberty of the individual, free of the restraints of convention. So the convention or the tradition is sort of rejected in this Neo-Taoism. Tao as absolute way, the way or the absolute is how Tao is defined. Principle of harmonious vitality informing all phenomena. Tao, what is Tao? Tao is the way that is found in the nature as a principle of harmonious vitality that informs all the phenomena of the nature. Beautifully explained there what Tao is. And the classics of Neo-Taoism are Tao Te Ching, attributed to Lao Tzu, I Ching and Chuang-Tzu, attributed to other major philosopher of Taoism. And then let's see now. So this is what is happening. Now let's take a look at slide 6. How Indian Buddhism becomes Chinese Buddhism, because China and India are two very different civilizations. What are the key differences in their languages, in their literary modes, in their psychology, in how they see time and space, and their socio-political values in the difference between China and India? If you look at this slide 6, very interesting. First row tells us that Chinese language is uninflected language, ideographic language, monosyllabic language, which has no formal grammar. Those are the hallmarks of Chinese language. Indian language, pretty different. It's an inflected language, alphabetic language, polysyllabic language with very developed, advanced form of formal grammar. You see how different the idea of language between China and India. Indian language Sanskrit is inflected, alphabetic, completely developed alphabet is divided into vowels and consonants, for example. Polysyllabic, long words, long sentences with uh, that we find in Sanskrit texts. Grammar is absolutely developed. It's called as Vyakaran, and that's how Indian languages, starting from Sanskrit all the way to modern language of Hindi, are very different from the Chinese language. Chinese language is ideographic language. You see small icons embedded into Chinese language itself, as you know. Second row, it tells us the literary modes are also different in China and India. Chinese literary mode emphasizes terseness, very compact, very short, very familiar metaphors are used. Not so imaginative, very less imaginative, very sort of concrete on the ground. Right? That's the Chinese way of writing, developing literatures. Indian literary modes, very different, very discursive, hyperbolic metaphors. Huge, beautiful, amazingly complex, abstract metaphors used in Indian literature. Very imaginative. All kinds of, the sun will be described as evening sun will be described as a small girl, morning sun also described as a small girl, night described as a woman, and so on and so forth, goddesses and whatnot. Very imaginative, very abstract, highly abstract way of defining Brahman, for example. What is Brahman? You can't even define Brahman. It's something that is transcendental, something that language cannot reach out, mind cannot grasp that phenomenon. What is Brahman? So just to give you an example, how abstract Indian literary modes have been all these thousands of years. So very different from Chinese style of writing literatures. Psychology in China is not even there. There is no really developed form or system of individual psychology in China. Come to India now. Indian psychology highly developed. There are complex systems of meditation. Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, for example, develops these ideas of psychology, breath control, meditation, yoga, tantra. All of these are highly developed in several different texts in India. Now, idea of time and space is very different also. In China, time is finite. Life is finite. Once one gets born and dies, the milieu is very, life and time is very generation oriented. What you see is what you get, kind of thing. Very concrete, again, very concrete, not abstract. Now, Indian situation again is very different. Time is infinite. We don't know when time started. We don't know when time will come to an end. We don't know when the universe started. We don't know when the universe will come to an end. There are these eons upon eons for millions and millions of years. This cycle of creation and dissolution of the universe goes on forever. So that infiniteness, this abstractness, is very highly developed and highly popular in Indian mode of thinking and how Indians have imagined time and space. Very different from Chinese way of looking at time and space. Socio-political values are also different in China and India. In China, family is the most important. Supremacy of secular power is more important than the religious power. Pursuit of the good society is highly valued in Chinese society. In Indian system, especially during the time of the Buddha, monasticism was highly developed. Universalism of Mahayana Buddhism that develops later on was highlighted. Supremacy of spiritual power, monks or Brahmin power, is higher than kings or emperors or the state. Pursuit of non-social goods is highly valued in the Indian system. Now, how these two systems are so different of China and India, Chinese civilization and Indian civilization, languages, literary modes, psychology, time and space, and socio-political values are so different in China and India. How these things that are so different in China, how do they affect the spread or embrace of Buddhism in China? That is what we are trying to understand now. So let's look at the next slide now. So go to slide 7 now. So you will see that Chinese people are translating Buddhism now, Buddhist texts, into Chinese language, but they use Taoist terms as they're translating Buddhism into Chinese language. So the Buddhist term of dharma or bodhi or yoga are translated as Tao when they reach China. The idea of nirvana, which means enlightenment in Buddhist terms, is translated as Wu Wei using the Taoist terminology. Idea of Arhat is translated as Chen Zhen in China. Shila is translated as Xiao Sun in China. Idea of rebirth in Buddhism translates into the spirit that never perishes. Because rebirth or reincarnation, transmigration of spirit is not yet was not present in China at that time. So instead of saying that the spirit or the soul or the being takes rebirth across different generations, the idea was translated into the spirit that never perishes. That was already present in Taoism. Buddha was made to resemble Lao Tzu. You see Buddha more plumb and more different features of Buddha now racialized into Chinese racial features. So Buddha now appears more like Chinese Lao Tzu. Buddhist practices are also adopted into Confucianist ideas. So the practice of shaving one's head when one becomes a monk or a nun, Buddhist people used to shave their head. So that was compared with the Confucianists who also did the same thing. Now, Buddhist celibacy was translated or was equated with Confucianists who also practiced celibacy. Now let's look at so this is some way to grasp our mind around how Buddhist ideas were nativized using the Chinese local traditions of Taoism and Confucianism. That's how Buddhism was embraced, and it spreads across China. Now we are looking at some different versions of Buddhism in China. First version that we are looking at is the Buddhist sect of Tintai. Tintai is a unique Chinese Buddhism. It is based on the Lotus Sutra that has the teachings of the Buddha. And it has the most prominent rituals in Tintai are the circumambulation around the Amida form of the Buddha. Amida is one of the popular forms of Buddha in China and Japan. So circumambulation around the murti or around the statue of Buddha is practiced in Tintai. Tintai also is based on Pure Land, a larger Pure Land Sutra that are more practical. It teaches that the enlightenment is not instant, but it's a gradual enlightenment. Kind of slowly polishing the mirror, and how that continuous polishing of the mirror keeps cleaning the mirror, and that's how the being of a being can be cleansed by continuous meditation. That's how the enlightenment can be achieved. So that's Tintai version of Buddhism in China. Next one is Huayan Buddhism. That one is based on Huayan or Flower Garland Sutra that contains the teachings of the Buddha. This one is more philosophical, more scholarly tradition, not so popular among the general public. This sect also teaches that enlightenment is very gradual process, continuous cleansing of a mirror. That's how, just as we saw in the previous one, Tintai, Huayan also believes in that. This also teaches two different aspects. Li, that is, and Qi. Li is that the principle that is based in every being in the universe never changes. So this tradition teaches using a metaphor of a golden lion. So every part of the lion will reflect some gold because it's a lion made up of gold. So the part will reflect the gold. The entire lion also reflects the gold. So the part and the entire phenomenon, they reflect each other, and part reflects the principle. Principle is the gold, and each part of the lion also is gold. So that's the idea of mutual interdependence and mutual identity are highlighted in this tradition. Organs of lion encompass the lion through gold. Gold in lion exists simultaneously and dependently. So one is present, one is many, and many is one. Right? So one principle of gold is present in many parts of the lion, and many parts in turn also reflect that oneness of lion. That's the idea that Huayan teaches. Huayan also teaches another beautiful metaphor that we saw actually in Hinduism also. the metaphor of jewel net of Indra. Is one of my favorite metaphor also, in which that entire universe is imagined as with infinite particles that reflect all the other infinite particles in the. So each particle in the universe reflects the Buddha nature, because each particle is empty at the most fundamental reality, and that emptiness is equated with the Buddha nature. So each Buddha, each empty particle reflects all the other infinite empty particles in the universe. So all these intersections are all interdependent, and they reflect Buddha as constitution of reality, and this universal emptiness is called as the jewel net of Indra. Then another metaphor that is used is dharm dhatu, and that again is consists of 8 plus 2, 10 mirrors that are facing a center, which is the Buddha nature again. So Buddha is reflected in all of these mirrors, and then these reflections in turn create infinite reflections. That can be again compared with this with golden lion or jewel net of Indra.